school, which Ron Paul represents, sees this as a cleansing period, which is heartless. The Jewish investment bank Goldman Sachs sure likes to take American taxpayers' money when it comes to bailing them out for their toxic assets mistakes. But when it comes to returning the favor, Goldman's Jewish bankers, Lloyd Blankfein, Gary Cohen, Stephen Friedman, are nothing less than crass ingrates, turncoats, to put it bluntly, downright traitors. History has proven that a sense of national loyalty has never been the working agenda of international Jewish banksters, and Goldman Sachs is a perfect example of Jewish betrayal of national interests. Only last week, Goldman cut 1,000 high-paying white-collar American jobs to be replaced with, you guessed it, Asian workers, this time in Singapore. Indeed, the Asian emerging market scenario, which is a euphemism for the transfer of American wealth, is looking better all the time for Goldman and their Jewish colleagues on Jewish Wall Street. Goldman calls its treasonous transfer of wealth growth and flexibility. But for America's millions of white-collar professionals, Goldman's growth and flexibility means either standing in unemployment lines or flipping burgers at McDonald's. You see, it all begins with Jewish finance capital controlling American industry. That began its intensification of outsourcing U.S. jobs in 2000, and its Jewish investment banks like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup that underwrite the stocks of U.S. corporations, dictating the terms of how those stocks are profiled to international investors. It all translates into cutting costs at the expense of the American worker and the American economy. 5 Goldman skyscrapers now adorn the skylines of Beijing and Shanghai. Sanford Vale of Citigroup, known as the Jewish godfather of Wall Street, is now exploiting, as reported by the Wall Street Journal last week, China's growing middle class. He's now adding 20 new Citigroup branches in China, bringing its total to 50, and lots more jobs for that growing Chinese middle class. And Jewish CEO Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan Chase was just awarded by his Chinese friends the highly prized gem of underwriting all of China's stocks and bonds in the mainland's joint securities ventures. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, former head of the IMF and recent victim of a political setup, forecasted this past spring that China's economy would surpass America's by 2016. This is good news for China's growing middle class and its Jewish enablers on Wall Street, who are both enjoying the transfer of American wealth to China's shores. But for America's white Christian middle class, whom Jewry views as the last political bloc that could oppose Jewish hegemony, it means not only disaster, but the beginning of a one-world governance led by bankers with names not like Williams, Smith, and Jones, but with names like Blankfein, Friedman, Cohen, and Vale.
Without Glass-Steagall being installed almost immediately, that is the idea, it should be immediate, whatever that immediate means. But the next step must be Glass-Steagall, and it must be Glass-Steagall as a system, not a monetarist system. A monetarist system form of approach to Glass-Steagall would actually cause chaos. Therefore, it must not be a monetary system, it must be a credit system, which was, as was in the constitutional formation of the United States, that was the economic policy. We should return to that policy. Otherwise, it won't.
Friday, October 11th, marked the 11th day of the government shutdown. Though the news was that a deal might be had soon, the truth is the government remains dysfunctional. They have no policy alternatives other than to rise out of the government shutdown fog to declare deeper, savage cuts that will sacrifice the standard of living of seniors and the poor while making others vulnerable. The government does not function, and unless key people in the United States rally for a real alternative, the American population should expect nothing other than a March 4th to the budget guillotine. In this week's LPAC in Action, topic will be the fight to overhaul the administration's budget acts crafted by Wall Street. On October 2nd, with Obama having not engaged in any deliberation with the House and Senate, provided ample time to meet with the CEOs of JP Morgan, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, and Goldman Sachs. The orders were given to continue the $85 billion Federal Reserve injection to benefit the investment houses and extinguishing any talk on restoring the Glass-Steagall Act. But as the White House and congressional leadership met Friday, October 11th, the full program came into effect to cut deep against services needed to support the lives of seniors and other vulnerable citizens. That is the game. Sacrifice the lives of the American population to the lords of Wall Street. Indicative of this came forth at a Senate Financial Services hearing where President of the American Bankers Association, Frank Keating, made the unabashful comment endorsing the chain CPI and a proposal to penalize the income of seniors who live too long.
Now, what happened in hearings on Capitol Hill today underscores that, and I think this is really quite important. The first hearing, there were two hearings in the Senate. The first one at the Finance Committee was basically Jack Lew yelling and screaming about the debt limit. But the more explosive from the standpoint of exposing what's going on was the hearing in the afternoon at the Banking Committee, where there was a panel of bankers, including Frank Keating, not a banker, but the head of the ABA, who went on and on about the need to deal with the long-term debt problem. In particular, the demographics of Social Security, why people are living longer. They're retiring earlier and they're living longer. And we're going to have to deal with this by some method, including possibly, change CPI, but there's also something called the longevity index. Now, I looked up the longevity index, and it is precisely what anticipated. The longevity index is if they think you're going to live a long time, you get less Social Security.
While LaRouche PAC members were in Washington, D.C. amidst the shutdown chaos, an event was held by Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Jan Schakowsky, making public that they will not allow the chain CPI to go through. What was evident is that to hold on to their promise, they will have to confront the White House, ultimately the source of the evil, Wall Street, as was indicated by Bernie Sanders' remarks.
And why it is an absolute outrage to go forward with the chain CPI. And almost every American understands what's going on in this country. And that is that the middle class of this country is disappearing, that millions of people are working longer hours for lower wages, that in terms of federal employees, they've gotten a raise in the last 3 years, that poverty in America today is the highest that it's ever been in terms of the number of people. 46.5 million people living in poverty. That's one reality. And then there's another reality, is that the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well. Almost all of the new income generated in the last 3 years goes to the top 1%. Corporate profits are at an all-time high. The gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is getting wider and wider. Now, it seems to me that if senior poverty is increasing, if the middle class is disappearing, you do not balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. It seems to me that when Social Security, in fact, has a $2.7 trillion surplus and can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American, you don't cut Social Security. You figure out a way that we make it stronger and we keep it vibrant for the next 75 years.
LaRouche PAC intervened at this event challenging the members of Congress to drop the partisan blame game and confront the enemy that controls both sides of the aisle, Wall Street, shutting them down with Glass-Steagall.
Aside from blocking the CPI, I'd like to know what your thoughts are in regards to halting the general trend since the TARP bailout regarding policies that have been asking the average American to sacrifice their standard of living. As you know, Sanders made the point to this, that there has been this egregious ratio where the middle class and poor people, they forget they exist, have been dramatically losing their purchasing power to buy food, rent, etc., while the top CEOs, to name a few like Moynihan, Blankfein, Goldman Sachs, and so forth, have been making record profits. So it seems that the general trend since TARP has been that there's been a generous support chain for these Wall Street banks, so to speak, while at the same time there's been a policy on both sides of the aisle to ask the American population to tighten your belts.
Yes, and that's why so many of us support raising the minimum wage, which is very important. That we have Democrats have a whole economic agenda for women in our economy. When women succeed, America succeeds, dealing with child care, the Paycheck Fairness Act, etc. And that's why we want to be able to move the American Jobs Act. We have an entire agenda that addresses income inequality. Unfortunately, the Republican majority in the House of Representatives continues to support an agenda that increases the income inequality in the United States of America, which is wrong. We are at our richest right now. It's important to note, we are at our richest as a country right now. If you were to divide it equally among Americans, but unfortunately what you've seen for the median income for Americans, we've seen flat or downward trend in the income of ordinary Americans. And as Senator Sanders said, we are losing the middle class. People are slipping into poverty. And so our agenda today is to make sure that we don't slip further, that that we don't allow any more of the policies that are going to increase poverty, that are increase struggling of ordinary Americans, and prevent the passage of the chain CPI.
Well, could I just ask also, because I know that you are a signer of the Glass-Steagall bill with this Marcy Captor. This has been raised pretty strong by also those before in the Senate. Do you think that that's a significant way to really bring up?
The effort in D.C. was backed up by a key group of activists who submitted letters to local papers in their states, calling out to their readers to rally behind the fight to bankrupt Wall Street and establish the beginning stages of a new economic approach. They were submitted by Arlene Martino and Lowell Sun in Massachusetts, Jeannie Hansen in South Dakota's Sioux Falls Business Journal, and Dan Schmidt in the Marshall Times-Republican in Iowa. In Mr. Schmidt's Love a Country letter, it read, "We all say we love America, the U.S. in particular. We ask God to bless our country. But really, what would you do to save it and ourselves?" As of October 2nd, from very reliable sources, Wall Street has demanded that President Obama stop the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. This Wall Street gang of hoodlum bankers, such as a coalition of the nation's 19 biggest banks and insurance companies, demanded that the Federal Reserve continue the $85 billion a month of quantitative easing bailout of the top Wall Street and European banks indefinitely. We with the LaRouche Group say, unless Glass-Steagall is passed into law immediately, Obama and the Wall Street plan to unleash the worst mass murder austerity and looting of the American people ever. The total separation of commercial banking from all gambling activities under Glass-Steagall is our only remedy. Bankrupt Wall Street now so that we can implement the original U.S. credit bank and launch a great economic project like NWAPA and an Apollo-style crash international program. Call your congressman now. There is not ample time to succeed